T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Kush's Corner here on the Trap Talk Reptile Network, the coolest reptile network in the world. Today is just a solo episode. I'm going to be going over a clutch of scrub pythons that I have recently hatched out a couple months ago that are my first ever F2 Barnecks, but not only that, a lot of historical significance in the lineage on both sides of the pairing. And I'm excited to break it all down for you guys. This is probably maybe the Arus are my most proud productions to date. In general, definitely for scrub pythons, and for sure the nicest of the Barnecks. So we'll get into all that in a second. Before all of that, of course, as always, USARK. So USARK is the organization that is fighting for our rights to keep our reptiles, to run our reptile businesses, to live this lifestyle. Check out usark.org for everything you need to know about the organization. usark.org is where you can find updates on legislation introduced either at local levels or at the national level, as well as updates on progress of any pieces of legislation. usark.org is also where you can become a member of the organization. As a community, we have strength in numbers, and the more people that are behind the cause, the better. And here we are. Thank you to everybody who is tuned in. If you are on YouTube or a streaming platform, it is most appreciated. If you are here on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. New podcasts drop every single day of the week from some of the best hosts in the game, talking about a wide variety of topics from within the reptile industry. So if you are a reptile podcast fan, you have come to the right place. We are also on all of the audio platforms, be that Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you get your podcast from, you can find the Trap Talk Reptile Network. Follow and a 5-star review on any of those platforms would be most appreciated. So here I am. Here we are. It is Wednesday. When you are watching or listening to this, I am doing this ahead of time. So if you are leaving a comment and I am not getting back to you, that is why. But I was super fortunate this year to have been able to produce F2 Barnecks for the first time. Really my first F2 scrub pythons of any distinction. And I'm really glad it was Barnecks, considering they are my favorites and the ones that I am really the most focused on when it comes to breeding. And not only are they F2s, but they are from two very incredible and distinct lineages on either side. The most notable being on the male side, the Rain lineage. And if you go back to the thumbnail here, Rain is the snake that is in the middle of the screen. He is, what many scrub fans would say, myself probably included, the nicest Barneck to ever live. And he is just spectacular. He was produced by Dave and Tracy Barker in the early 2000s. I believe 2001 or 2002 is when Rain was born. And, that was around the time when scrub python breeding was really starting to become a thing at all. I'm not even sure, my math might be off. I'm not sure that even Somalia Traciae was even described yet. Probably the time Morelia Traciae originally. So this is kind of putting in perspective the time at which this lineage really became a thing. And, for good reason. This animal is just amazing. And I do have pictures to help us along the way here. So here is one of the babies. And just up front, I'm blown away. They've only had, actually, one of them hasn't even had their first shed yet. But they're only on shed number 1, and they're just already looking fantastic. We'll get into a lot of different aspects of these lineages and kind of how they're combining here to make these offspring. But here's that picture of Rain, a little bit more blown up on the screen. So he was a beast of a snake. I believe he was around 14 feet long, which for anybody who knows scrub pythons is an absolute monster for a Barneck. I mean, that is a top 0.001% animal, just absolutely giant. For anyone who hasn't seen a Barneck that is, or a scrub that is that big, the difference between a 12-foot scrub python and a 14-foot scrub python, it seems like the snake is twice the size. So for an animal to be 14, I heard 15 feet long. I question that, but I've had a 14-foot Barneck, and from everything I've seen, they look like they were about the same size. So alone, just massive. At least for the animals that have survived in the lineage, it doesn't seem like that size was necessarily a heritable trait. I guess I'll see with these babies that I'm raising up now. Of course, I'm holding on to them all. Only 4 babies and is 1.3. So the perfect ratio to justify holding them all back. So anyway, that's Rain, and we'll get into a little bit more depth of that lineage. But just to show you guys up front, the mom, this is her. I'll get a better picture to show her. I like that picture of her. So I had her for about 4 years in my collection. During that time, got a clutch from her as well, not the clutch that produced the mom. So I have half siblings raising up to the mom of these babies, and then her siblings who I have as well. And as you can see from this picture, what makes her so special is that she was the darkest Barneck I have ever seen. So while this picture was while she was gravid, she was that color all the time. So as many of you probably know, scrub pythons in general, when they're deep into their follicular development, and then when they're gravid, they transition their color to be much, much darker than they typically are. And then in almost every instance, with one exception being Moluccan scrubs, which once a female becomes gravid, she really never goes back to her original colors. But without that exception, almost every single scrub python will go really dark, have their clutch, and the first shed after they lay, their color comes completely back. This was her every day of the year. So that alone is just, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely insane that this animal is as dark as she is. I mean, she has pattern, but it's like very shrouded in the just overall dark coloration of her. So I have tentatively called all of the descendants of her the melanistic line. Probably going to change that at some point, because while it describes her, it really has yet to describe her progeny. And I'll get into a little bit of that, what I think could be going on, or what I am already seeing. I guess to preface it, I will say I do believe there is some sort of genetic component going on with this animal, whether it be a recessive gene or whatnot. I think that's probably what I'm leaning to right now, is whatever she is a recessive gene, or even maybe a mixture of a couple of genes based on the appearance of some of her offspring. And we will get into that a little bit later. So, but for now, back to the Rain line. So, multi-generation lineage that I do believe the F3 Barneck that Chris Foley had did have Rain lineage on one side. Actually, for sure it had Rain lineage on the mother's side. He produced a clutch from his male Hannibal, which was an F2, unrelated to the Rain lineage, to a sibling of the female that, I guess, so wow, we're getting into the weeds, but so the grand dam of the babies I just produced, her sister is the one that Chris used to produce his F3, which, so 50% Rain line. And just that animal was absolutely incredible. So it's been extrapolated out before this lineage, and it seems to be very strong as far as this kind of high contrast yet thin banded appearance. A lot of the Barnecks that I've produced that have had heavier pattern, and I think this look is just killer, have had really thick bars. And a lot of the animals that I've gotten from reduced pattern pairings that do develop more pattern have these kind of more pinstripey bars going on. But not these rain line animals. And when we kind of take a look at some of the babies a little bit later, you'll really be able to see, a couple of them really, really resemble their great grandfather a lot. Here's another picture of Rain. Where'd it go? Here we go. So, all coiled up. You kind of see those. This is not my picture. I'm not sure why there's those snips right behind the snake, but for whatever it's worth. Huge snake. Super high contrast, light colored tail. The tail color will be something that we'll get into that's kind of interesting. As many of you have probably heard me say before on here, Barnecks really follow one of two different trajectories. If you follow my cursor, which, by the way, for anyone who's not watching, who's listening, you're not going to get a whole lot out of listening to this podcast. You really need to go to YouTube. There's a lot of visual elements to it as well. But so tails in Barneck scrub pythons either are a mostly patternless continuation of the black or of the base tan gold color. Obviously here on Rain, it is a continuation of the tan. I can't say whether I like a light or a dark tailed Barneck better. Honestly, I really don't think I could pick. Gun to my head though, I probably would take this look, but I'm glad I don't need to make that choice. So you can see here, his tail is a little bit fired down compared to that last picture, but still you can see all that really came of a bit of a fire down. It's just kind of more prominent outlines on the scales, where the scales themselves are actually still very light colored. So here's the grand dam of the clutch. So Rain's daughter, an animal that I had. Unfortunately, I never got her to produce for me, but she was the mother of the sire of the clutch. So at least the lineage was able to get traced down that way. But she very much resembles Rain in a lot of ways. The bars are, a little thicker proportionally, but still very much akin to him. A little bit deeper gold coloration, where he's a little bit lighter gold. Unfortunately, I don't know what her father or her mom looked like, so there are some holes in the pedigree here, unfortunately, as far as actual documentation of the animal goes, but it's obviously all what it is. So, some of these pieces don't matter as much in the long run. Would it be great to have every single component? Sure, but I'll take what I can get. So this is actually that animal, Hannibal, that I was talking about earlier, that the big male in the back, an attempted F3 pairing that never came to fruition when Chris loaned me that male. But again, that's her in the middle, the smaller individual, really to show just some of that contrast in her. So her, this is another picture, very sideways picture, just after swallowing a rat. Her tail is light, obviously a lot of very strong outlines on the scales, but just an overall slightly deeper coloration than her dad, more on the gold side than on the tan side. This is a really good look at exactly what she was all about. This kind of like mid, not so fired up, not so fired down appearance on her. So, her tail could really go from light to dark depending on the state she was in, the point of the shed cycle. But as you can see, even when it's looking darker, it really just constitutes of thick outlines on a thin pattern. So yeah, she is amazing. This really kind of shows a fired up appearance of her color, and the contrast just really gets super strong. So, and another thing that's so cool about scrub pythons and Barnecks in particular is that kind of fire up, fire down. You kind of get a bunch of different snakes in one, which is super cool. Here's her stretched out. Again, you can get a really good perspective of exactly how she looks. So, very similar to dad, a bit different, but her offspring just are fantastic. And this is another point of a hole in the pedigree. I don't have images of the sire, but this is actually the sire of my clutch, as probably a yearling or so. I hope, at least. Again, very strong but thin bars, very akin to Rain, his grandsire. Just a really amazing look. He was a beautiful snake. And this is a sister of his, to kind of give a little bit more of a, perspective on the lineage. But one thing that was really cool about her was her tail, a super dark tail, which was not typical for the Rain lineage, but was a really neat look. This is her as well, with a little bit more age on her. So much thicker bars than Rain, kind of more akin to her mom. Really high contrast. This is a picture of her, and just, man, that snake was amazing. Just super thick black bars, really high contrast, and then fading into that dark tail. I think it would be really cool. I know it would be really cool. I hope I eventually have that happen to where some dark-tailed individuals come out of this Rain line, but it's going to be a long process. Unfortunately, I'm only have left with the offspring of this clutch left from the lineage. I've discussed in a previous podcast an instance I had where I acquired a collection that many of the animals contracted cancer at a young age, and these ones all fell victim to that, unfortunately. So super sad. But the silver lining at the end of the day was that these F2 Rain line offspring are in my group now, and they're perfect. So another image of her fired up where that tail looks a little bit lighter, and just really shows, just for perspective, how dynamic this lineage can be. So this is the dad when he was a bit younger, and it just very different appearance from his sister in a lot of ways, and frankly a lot more like his dad. So this is him with a different female than the one that laid the clutch. This is actually one that I produced in 2020 that they locked up a couple of times, but the female ended up reabsorbing. So you can just see how light his base color is, how high the contrast is there. And you can really see in his offspring exactly how that manifests. And same female again. Unfortunately, I didn't get a whole lot of good pictures of this pair actually copulating that produced the clutch. So this now kind of getting into the mom side of the pedigree. And this is that really dark female pretty soon after she was imported. So, based on that photo, I would assume she's between, maybe 5 or 6 feet, close to 6 feet. So definitely came in with a little bit of age on her. You can see she's a really mature head. Frankly, if I didn't know any better, I'd look at that picture and I potentially think that snake is a male considering its proportions, but obviously a lot of imported scrubs have a bit of a toll taken on them by the importation process. So that's more than likely why she looked that way, although she was always a pretty slender individual, even leading up to breeding. So here's her again. And obviously the thought with this animal was, all right, this is going to be the start of melanistic Barnecks. And, unfortunately, she was never bred by a male that was comparable to her as far as how dark she was. So that was an unfortunate miss. But I have one daughter of hers that is not quite as dark as her, but still pretty dark. So I could imagine that that animal would be able to carry it on. But then again, I do have my suspicions about a potential genetic component going on with her. This is her, like, as bright as you would see her. Obviously, her tub was a little dirty at the time, her hide tub, but that kind of, little bit of like chocolatey brown coming in. That's about as light as she would ever get when she was fired up. So super, super dark animal. And let's see what else I got here. This is a picture of her gravid. You can see how thick that back end of her body is. And her pattern, when you did see it, when she was fired up enough where you could see it, super weird, super irregular, just really, really interesting look. I always love weird aberrancies in Barnecks. And, most of the time it was shrouded by how dark she is. But when I was able to see it, it was just super cool. Another image of her gravid. So up front, the kind of beginnings of these lineages that I've shown you guys, they don't really appear to be the most compatible. You wouldn't think that this would actually be a good way to really exemplify the best traits of each lineage. It's really nothing that I would have ever considered if this was my only basis to go off of. I would have thought you're just going to muddy up the rain line and you're going to just take this melanistic line and brighten it unnecessarily, what's the point? This is another image of her gravid. You can see like almost solid black at that point. I showed that image earlier. This is the clutch that she had for me. Unfortunately, a lot of the eggs weren't good, so I only had 4 viable offspring come off from it, but come of it. I have 3 of those individuals still in my collection, and they are just amazing. We'll take a look at a little bit of them. So this is the grandsire of the clutch. He was a wild-caught individual, absolutely gorgeous. So I did not do this pairing. He was bred to the melanistic female, and the results of that clutch were just wild and all over the place, which seems to really be a theme with scrub pythons, in particular Barneck breeding, is, you can do your best to, obviously this was not a pairing where the phenotype of the parents were super similar, but you can do that where you find very similar looking parents, put them together, and then some random weirdness will pop out of the clutch, and it is just the coolest thing possible. So I actually, obviously in my hand there, I did have this snake for a little while. He produced 1 clutch for me, and still to this day, I have 6 holdbacks from that clutch, and 5 of them are males. They're amazing. And they're finally, like, this is the year when hopefully if any of them are really willing breeders, they'll be ready to get going and, produce some offspring. This is really going to be my first year where I have a legit shot at breeding Barnecks that I produced. So while it was really special to get F2s at all, especially from animals I raised up from a pretty young age, getting F2s from individuals that I produce, I feel like will be even more special. But hey, this is taking nothing away from these snakes. So this is actually him paired up with the female that eventually laid that clutch for me. So pretty similar appearance. She was a bit darker than he, dark tail on her, where his tail was a little bit lighter, but still fairly compatible pairing. And I don't have any pictures in this slideshow of their offspring, considering that it's kind of not really relevant to the pairing at hand, but just absolute stunners. So this is Mom the day that I got her. Very small little skinny worm. And you can kind of piece together how this would potentially be the result of the pairing, where, a lot of dad's pattern in there, kind of bold, but a little bit tighter. And I kind of gave it away a little bit with that next picture. But as soon as she had her first shed with me and got some meals in her, put a little bit of size on, as you can tell in this picture, she was pretty skinny when I got her. This started to pop up. And I'm like, what the heck is going on here? So, when this animal was young, the mom, obviously, the first thing that myself and anyone would think is, oh my gosh, I have an axanthic Barneck. And whether or not she is that, I guess, kind of remains to be seen. But I was like, wow, this is going to be super cool. So obviously the picture's a little bit on the blue side, but my skin tone is pretty normal there. So it might be slightly exaggerated as to how she really looked at the time, but not really. So here's a picture that Zach Hurd took of her. You can really see, when she was younger, she was very gray, silver, axanthic looking. And, some of those blue tones that you're catching down in her tail, they were very much present when she was younger. So I was really hoping she was going to maintain this color as she got older, but it wasn't the case. She did fade out a little bit. I mean, with that said, she is absolutely gorgeous in every way possible. But that really silvery axanthic appearance didn't maintain, but that's not a total lost cause. And we'll get into a little bit more of why that is. So as you can see, this is a good picture to really show her pattern. The bars are thicker than the rain line animals for sure. And some of them are a little lower contrast, especially kind of here mid-body. You can see the lines are a bit blurry. There's a bit of that darkness bleeding over. But as you can remember from Mom, That's kind of how she looked a little bit. Back to this picture here, some of her bars, although super irregular, kind of have a lot of that color and pattern bleeding through. So, it's interesting just to see how that transition happened. But while a solid black or almost solid black animal does not seem like one that would do very well with the rein line, this girl right here absolutely would. And I think adds a lot of really cool elements to it. So another picture, her getting a little bit older. And this was soon after I moved into my new house. So this picture was probably taken in December or January of what would have been, it was January 2024. So, about a year or so before she really started to breed. And it's a little bit washed out yellow, but she started to get a little bit more yellow. Not fully golden like some of the other Barnecks that I've had, but kind of like a yellow wash on a gray snake, a little more brownish. This is her while she was gravid, actually. So as I talked about a little bit earlier, when female scrub pythons become gravid, they typically get really dark. And I almost had like this panic moment of like, I thought that I had seen everything go the way it was supposed to. Copulations, follicular development, ovulation, going off food, pre-lay shed. And she sheds and like isn't that dark. Like she's darker than she normally is, but isn't super dark. But as soon as those eggs really started growing, I'm like, yeah, there's no mistaking this at all. But obviously from this picture, she doesn't look super axanthic. With that said, though, you can kind of make an analogous comparison to axanthic ball pythons where they start off really brilliant, almost like blue silver when they're babies. And then by the time they're adults, they're a little bit more browned out. So whether there's an axanthic or an antheristic component to this at some point, I guess it remains to be seen. I think the jury is very much still out on it. But with that said, I think that could be a potential component of what's going on genetically with this melanistic lineage. So here's one of her sisters. And of course, this is one of those, kind of Barnecks where you look at the mom, you look at the dad, you're like, all right, I kind of have an idea of what might be coming. And then you see an animal like this and you're like, please explain to me how this could even be here. So to me, she's almost kind of like a hypo looking individual. And when she was young, she looked like this. This was a few years ago. She looks like that now, a little bit darker, but still pretty much looks like this. And very, very, very faint pattern, really light colored tail. But let's see if I have a good picture of her tail on here. To me, especially when she was a little bit younger, her tail almost kind of looked like a dark tail that you kind of strip some layers of paint away from. So this animal, so like the mom of the clutch made me curious that there was some sort of axanthicism, antheristic, whatever going on here. And then this animal made me wonder if there was some sort of hypomelanism going on. The dad himself was absolutely gorgeous, but nothing out of the ordinary, particularly as far as a Barneck goes with this animal. It's a very, very high-end animal, very high-end Barneck, super nice, especially for a wild caught. But, nothing abnormal. That gold color is a very normal coloration. That pattern is very normal. So for this animal to be the sire of that animal makes absolutely no sense to me, aside from the fact that there could be something going on with mom, the melanistic animal. So this is a really good image of her. She's got pattern, especially near the mid body. It just is super washed out, very, like I said, kind of hypomelanistic looking. Again, another image of her. So, and this is a third sibling that I have from that clutch, another sister, just very dark and very contrasted. Color wise, nothing, I guess I don't want to say nothing too crazy because I don't think that's really a good representation, but just gorgeous, but nothing where it's like I've never seen anything like that before. But it's almost kind of you take the mom and make her a lot darker, and a little bit less axanthic looking, even though this girl kind of has that dark brown gray appearance to her. But that the thick banding, the really regular banding, and then kind of how the base color has some of those, like the base color scales are not one color. They really have those dark outlines on them. And you can kind of compare that back to Mom, this picture that I've gone back to a couple of times. If we really zoom in here, how all of those base color scales kind of have that same tip at the end. So I think of that clutch, the most similar to Mom, even though her base color is much, much, much lighter. But still just, fascinating. She's a gorgeous snake. I very much hope to produce from her this year. This was last year. This pairing didn't amount to anything, but most of the time I found that for these scrubs, the first year that they go through their follicular cycle, it is very common for them to reabsorb. And then the next year, if parameters are right, if feeding is right, actually go through and produce a clutch. So this is a male that I produced in 2020, paired up with her. In my opinion, a very compatible pair. The female, or the female is, in my opinion, a good bit nicer than the male, but she's also like a top 1%er. Male is still very nice, but compatible base color. The male has a lot of pattern. So I think that this just takes what she is and accentuates it to a further degree. So we'll see. They're actually back together right now. So going into some more of the offspring from the dark female. This is the clutch that I produced. So they were born in 2023. This picture's a little bit old. This is a little, like maybe a year and a half old. This animal right now is about 5 to 6 feet long, but still has that kind of gold to him. And that's why I held on to him. It was for me picking between him and a sibling male. That male is now with Carly, so I know he's in good hands and going to be in a breeding program. One of truly only 2 animals from this project that I've released. And that gold is just, it makes no sense to me, because none of the other animals from this melanistic quote unquote lineage have been gold at all. They've all been on the kind of brown gray to silver scale. And even that hypo animal wasn't really gold, or, like I showed earlier, she's like a weird yellow gray. So he's fascinating. And not only will I be using him for, breeding him back to siblings and half siblings to try to see if there's any sort of genetic component going on here, he's also going to be an animal that I'm going to use for reduced pattern projects. Obviously, as you guys can see here, this is exactly what I'm shooting for with some of my reduced pattern Barnecks, kind of on the way to a patternless Barneck. Very little pattern, irregular, and then the color of those bars is very similar to the base color, and almost sometimes it just is the result of outline scales, like this scale right here. For anyone who's watching, you can see my cursor. The interior color of the scale is the same as the base color scales. It just has a dark outline to it. So fascinating individual right there. Here's the male that Carly has back, obviously, when I had this individual. So really cool dark tail, that same really irregular pattern. And frankly, the only reason why I decided to keep that previous male over this one was because he looks a lot like his sister. And here she is. So I kind of alluded to the snake earlier on. Of all of the individuals that have come from this melanistic female, she's the one who looks most like Mom, which is not saying much considering that she doesn't really look like Mom based on not being really dark. But with that said, she's one of the darkest Barnecks I've ever produced as far as overall color goes. And then the pattern is very, very similar to Mom. So maybe this animal will be part of potentially unlocking that melanistic Barneck. Really remains to be seen. I got to give a shout out real quick. TJ Chambers has produced some ridiculous melanistic Barnecks that are just, mind blowing. The kind of thing that would be perfect to plug into this project. So shout out to TJ. And, obviously you can take a look at this male, take a look at the female. They're very similar. She just kind of, you take the shade down a few bit, a few shades lower. So she's amazing. But what's interesting is you can kind of make a comparison to this female back here. Very similar base color. This more low patterned girl is darker, but a bit of an analogous color there. So I just find it interesting how these different phenotypes have popped up. And let's see. So the next picture here, this is where this gets super interesting, because I don't know what that hypo individual we were just looking at looked like as a baby, because I didn't produce it. This is a sibling of that last animal right out of the egg. And I didn't know how to process this when this animal came out of the egg, because that is not what a baby Barneck is supposed to look like. So obviously, for anyone who doesn't know, Barneck scrub pythons are typically born kind of like a brick red color. And over the first 2 to 3 sheds, they do a majority of their color change. The rest of that color change kind of comes over the next 3 subsequent years, but a majority of it happens in the first 2 to 3 shed cycles. And the rest of its siblings, like the ones we just took a look at, had a pretty normal baby color. And this one, and one that also hatched that didn't make it, was kind of deformed. This snake is like purple. It's, kind of like a steel grayish purple. I was so excited when this animal was born. You can look on, like, the head is very weird. And then, obviously very little pattern at this point throughout the body. You can kind of see it. Baby Barnecks in particular really obscure their pattern before their first shed. They're just so shiny. And this is her a couple sheds in, kind of fired down in this image, but very weird. I almost kind of compare this animal to like a true ghost ball python, like an axanthic hypo. So when I saw this, I'm like, man, this is almost a combination of that more axanthic looking girl, the sire of this clutch from this year, and then the hypo female, or the hypo female sibling from that girl. Hopefully you guys are following with that. I'm kind of butchering this all up. So, but essentially a combination of her 2 half siblings that are 4 years older than her. And this is probably when she looked her most axanthic-y, was, I believe right at that like 3 shed mark. Or June 17th. So a little bit further than that. This animal was just shy of a year old, and just mind blowing to me. Like, literally looked like a ghost. I still, to this day, she's fading a little bit, pretty much in line with her older half siblings, but this is not normal. This is not a regular Barneck, and especially considering that animal and this animal are siblings. If it was any other species, I would just assume that there was something genetic going on here, considering how crazy different it is, and how crazy different it is from anything I've ever seen before. So obviously that'll be something that I try to prove out in the future. So far in my brief scrub breeding history, what I've been really fascinated by, any babies that have hatched out with an atypical neonate coloration. And I didn't include any pictures in this slideshow, but I have a Barneck from an unrelated pairing, a male, this is a female, that was born not quite as extreme as this animal right here, but like as close as I've ever seen from an animal that's not from this lineage. And he's very reduced pattern as well, very much like her. So in 2 years or so, that's going to be a pairing that I'm going to be doing and that I am super excited about. I guess it's not my initial impulse, but I guess one could say, hey, breed this one back to a sibling and, to the male sibling and see what happens. And while I may do that for a second pairing, I think for establishing any sort of new gene or whatever, you got to be, if this in fact is what's going on, or even if it's not, that doesn't change my plans at all, frankly. But if this is a new gene, it's really important to outcross that from the start, because frankly, color and pattern mutations, they're deleterious genes. They're weaker genes, and are often accompanied by other genes that you really wouldn't want present in your animals. So if you can keep the coloration but breed out some of the potential weakness there, that's all you can really do. So I guess here's the next picture. Again, just the animal's a little bit older here. This is at the beginning of this year, and still really maintaining that ghostly appearance. You can see too, she was born with a little bit of a kink tail, not to where it affects her at all, but that's like, especially for that, I'm like, this animal gets outcrossed. It doesn't get inbred, for any potential weakness that could be there. So, and honestly, based on that deformity, I would almost have some sort of like question of, is this coloration the result of some sort of incubation mix-up? And I guess it's not impossible for that to be the case, considering her half siblings, her older half siblings. I don't believe that's what's going on here. So, yeah, I mean, like even right here, like look at the tail, like that's a very peculiar, unique coloration, especially for an animal that's like 2 years old, or almost 2.5 at the time of this picture. So with all of that out of the way, now we're kind of getting into the meat and potatoes here. This is one of the lock pictures that I got from the pair. They're very, very sneaky about it. Honestly, oftentimes doing this like either in the hide or the lay box or behind the box, somewhere to where a really good picture was not very feasible. But they went right to it. It was the smoothest scrub breeding process I've ever had. And I'm not sure if that can be accounted to the fact that they're both captive bred. That's one data point I have. And maybe this time next year, I'll have a little bit of a better say as far as that goes. But it's very encouraging nonetheless. Scrub pythons are not the most difficult snakes to breed in the world. For anyone who hasn't checked out my podcast from last week with Ryan Young, Rob Christian, and Brian Fisher, all about scrub breeding, breaking the record for the longest podcast I've done here, over 4 hours. That's a must check out episode for any person who's interested in scrub pythons and particularly breeding, but even really you can glean a lot of the information from that episode just towards keeping itself. With that said, there aren't a whole lot of data points on breeding of captive bred scrub pythons. Well, there are plenty, but not nearly as many as wild caught. So my real hope is that this is a sign of good things, that these captive bred individuals breed much more readily than the wild caughts, to where give it a few generations, maybe we're not talking about scrub pythons as being as difficult to breed as they really have been seen historically. They've been bred for probably pushing 30 years now in captivity, and there is no established lineage really of any Barnecks or scrubs in general. But if there's any, there's lineages in Barnecks, with the rain line right here, and then the Prada line animals, which are almost entirely gone, unfortunately. I have one female that I'm trying my hardest to breed, and then Rob Christian has produced animals that are Prada lineage as well. So, eventually, when I'm able to, either by one of these raising up and breeding with my adult female, or probably the more likely outcome is she has offspring, raise them up to produce F3. Yeah, they'd be F3, but fourth generation on the Prada line side at that point down the line. Having the Prada line, the rain line, and this melanistic lineage all in one would be just absolutely ridiculous. And that's what I think is so cool about where we're at with scrub pythons and Barnecks in particular, is we're at the ground floor. I take a lot of inspiration from what a lot of the green tree python community has done as far as maintaining, tracking, refining lineages over decades and decades. It's exactly where I want to be with the scrub pythons, and frankly, a lot of other people who are passionate about scrub pythons and breeding them feel the exact same way as I do. So I'm very confident that that's going to be somewhere that we all kind of head to in the future. You know, I think it would be absolutely amazing if in 20 years, you know, I have animals that are maybe F5, F6 generation that I can trace back over 40 years. I think that would be absolutely incredible. Yeah, here she is. She laid 8 eggs, 7 of which were fertile. 5 of them made it the distance. 1 baby was very small and weak and didn't make it. And then 4 of them were literally the biggest, most robust baby scrubs I've ever had, like to a ridiculous degree. And you can see, you know, she's not dark at all. This is on the clutch. This is as dark as she should get. So, you know, it is interesting. I guess when they're really light, they don't get that much darker at times. But kind of to reference back to the axanthic conversation, you know, you don't really see it here. Obviously, this is not a normal Barneck, like not a very typical Barneck coloration, but nothing that's like extremely out of the ordinary. So, but then again, potentially analogous to an axanthic ball python. Either way, you know, it doesn't matter that much. It just will come down to exactly what I'm actually dealing with here, but doesn't change my approach whatsoever if this animal is an axanthic or recessive gene, whatever. So yeah, here's the clutch. Looked pretty good. That top egg right there wasn't any good. And then here are those 4 babies right out of the egg. So as you can see, just big, robust babies. You know, pretty typical neonate coloration. But one thing that was really interesting up front, if you look at those bars, the bars themselves were purple. I've hatched out plenty of Barnecks that have heavy pattern from the jump, and that pattern is black through and through. So when this happened and these babies came out with a pretty, 3 of the 4 of them had a pretty typical neonate base color, but then they had these purple bands. I'm like, all right, we're cooking here. Something's going on, and I am here for it. Another image of the babies. Here's for some reason the videos get all washed out, so I'm not gonna torture you guys with that. Just so I have an idea. Okay. So this is one of the babies, pre-shed, obviously, and the coloration doesn't look super normal at this point. The bands are purple for sure, and the coloration's a little bit more washed out than normal. Not quite to the extreme of that kind of ghostly looking baby from 2023, but different. So to me, this animal right here, and I have some post-shed pictures later on in the slideshow in a couple minutes, is like about everything I could have asked for in this pairing. It has that high contrast but thin banded rain line appearance, that light colored tail, and then this weird color influence from this melanistic line. They haven't really changed at all yet. They're still pretty young. Like I said, they've had their first, 3 of them have had their first shed. 1 of them hasn't even shed yet, and he's pushing double-digit meals. So I'm not sure what he's waiting on, but I'm not super worried about it. Scrub pythons will do that, it seems. But like this right here up front, I'm like, man, I couldn't have asked for more than this baby. Here is another one. And this one I also have post-shed pictures of. This is actually the one from the beginning of the slideshow. You can't really see those same kind of purpley bars. They're a little bit thicker on this one. And a really cool aspect of this snake, it has a double layer of the side portholes all the way down it. Again, we'll be able to see better the post-shed pictures. This one is the most normal looking baby of the clutch, which is kind of saying a lot because it's pretty spectacular. But like coloration wise, this is a very normal baby color. This one you can see too, after those first day, the first days where it was looking pretty normal, kind of got a little bit more pale as well, very much like this sibling. This one didn't do that at all. So like this is what a baby Barneck scrub is supposed to look like normally, as far as that kind of like brick red coloration. Obviously the bands are not normal. that kind of lighter purpley appearance. This guy right here, this is Buddy, who has not shed yet. And he looks really, really similar to that ghostly looking baby from 2023 at this stage. He's got the least amount of pattern as well. Very, very thin banding. And especially his head, you can really see like it's just, there's something very different going on with this individual. So I really can't wait for this one to shed. But it is a male. So like this could be one that I eventually breed to the ghost female. And while they would share 25% genetics, 75% would be outcrossed, just to kind of see what happens, see if there's any sort of link going on here. And, you know, frankly, at this point, based on some of these results, you know, there might be some like visual het thing going on here. What do you want to call it? You know, maybe an incomplete dominant. There's something, because some of the babies, like for a baby to look totally normal and a baby to look like this, I don't know, makes me think. So here is that first baby post shed, and like, I just, my breath just gets taken away by this animal. Those bars darkened up a decent amount after the first shed, where they're kind of like really looking purple. They're not normal, but they're more normal looking than when the animal was born. And they're high contrast, but they're light. And that's interesting to me. But I think it's also potentially a very, an apropos combination of what all went into this animal, where these kind of melanistic line individuals can have this really light appearance, ironically enough, and the rain line has this crazy contrast. Well, maintained all of the crazy contrast, and then that lightness influenced the bars themselves instead of washing out the whole snake, which is just, I mean, I've never seen anything like this. And which is also cool. They all have this kind of like highlighter yellow nose, pretty neat. So to me, like, I know it can get better, because these are only F2, while they are technically like fourth generation in on mom's side or on the dad's side. You got to go to the lowest common denominator. So the female, the mom being F1, doesn't matter. The dad was F2. He wasn't F3. But 1 + 2 does not equal 3 in this instance. This is 2 + 1 = 2, unfortunately. But it's just a label at the end of the day. It doesn't really change anything about the snake. So this is that other one. This is the second one that I showed. And I don't know what to think about this snake, except for I just am absolutely in love. That double porthole layer is much more visible on these pictures, of course, because the animal is post shed. This really interesting like side pattern here forming early on in the body. The bars are much thicker, kind of like the melanistic line animals, but then very light. But they're light and high contrast. So again, like another pretty much perfect combination of the two lineages in one. This really shows, like, I've produced a lot of reduced pattern, lighter animals, but they don't have this it's hard to call it high contrast, but like these crisp lines, these crisp edges. The edges are always a little bit blurry, and that's really not the case with this animal here. You can see the neck bars are very solid, dark, and then like boom, 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 a few in on the neck, it starts fading. And then by like right here, I mean, that bar is almost completely vanished. Just, I mean, no words, just blown away. So the light tail as well. I can only imagine these guys will develop color-wise very much influenced by the rain line. But then again, who knows? That's the fun part about these Barneck scrubs, is as much as I have tried to kind of predict what is going to come of a lot of this stuff, there is no prediction that has really maintained for me, unfortunately. I mean, not unfortunately, because it's all been great. A fun part of the learning process, trying to guess what babies are going to look like, trying to guess what, once they're born, how they're going to change. I feel like I'm getting better at it very slowly but surely. And I got a long way to go, but fortunately I have a whole lot of time to do that. So yeah, I mean, that's the end of the slideshow. I had this video here, but all these videos have been getting super washed out, so I'm not going to hurt all your eyes out there who are watching. But yeah, I mean, definitely something that I'm going to be keeping up with in the future, giving you guys updates on these babies particularly. And really, if anything else, I'm just so excited for what this means for the future of Barneck scrub pythons in captivity, for multi-generation captive breeding, for tracking lineages over the decades to come. It's going to be really special. And for me, these animals are a great way to start it off. I really couldn't be happier with them, and I'm happy I was able to share them with you guys. So thank you for checking out the episode. If you want to find me, I'm all over the place. I'm on Instagram at Scrub Shepherd, Stephen Kush on Facebook. I haven't done a shout out for the Somalia group on Facebook. That's my Facebook group for a while, but join the group if you are interested in scrub pythons. It's a community full of really good, positive people who are, encouraging. We're not gatekeeping. We're sharing information and just, trying to spread the love of scrub pythons and Boelen's pythons. Boelen's are involved as well. Can't discount them from the Somalia group. So, but yeah, Facebook, Stephen Kush, and the Somalia Facebook group. I'm on Morph Market under Kush Reptile. I have some individuals available there right now if you want to take a look. And then I am on YouTube as well, Kush Reptile. That's something I've been really focusing on this year. And I'm so appreciative of everybody who has subscribed and checks out the videos on a regular basis. I had some modest goals for my first year on YouTube, and I was able to get there a lot quicker than I was anticipating. So again, just couldn't be more grateful to everybody who has been supportive along the way. And yeah, I'm here every Wednesday night, Kush's Corner on the Trap Talk Reptile Network. So thank you very much, everybody, for checking out this episode. Very much appreciate it. I'll catch you all back here next week for a new episode.
Sorry for the interruption, folks, but a quick word from our sponsors. Green tree pythons, emerald tree boas, and plenty other arboreal snakes have been quite the popularity here at the Trap Talk Reptile Network, which brings me to today's sponsor, the Reptile Perch. Head over to the reptileperch.com and Reptile Perch on Instagram. See what type of design PVC perch is best for your arboreal reptile. But first and foremost, I would also check out David Brom's Green Tree Python availability on the website. And you can also check out his Instagram just to stay current on any projects or any productions that he posts. Thank you so much, David Broms, for your ongoing support. Looking forward to seeing what you have to show in the 2025 season. When you think about building a good community and being a leader of that community, nobody comes to mind better than Mark Hager over at Texas Chondros. That's right. Make sure you head over to TX Chondros on Instagram and also head over to Mark's website. See what he has available Green Tree Python wise, and be ready for quite the 2025 Green Tree Python breeding season out of Mark Hager. He's a veteran in the Green Tree Python game, one of the best and nicest breeders in the Green Tree Python game. He's been putting on the whole state of Texas for as long as I've known him. So if you want to see all the amazing other chondro keepers out of the state of Texas, another good reason to go follow Mark Hager over at TX Chondros on Instagram. And again, head over to his website, texaschondros.com. You can find all the links in the description below. Thank you so much, Mark Hager, for supporting the trap. Cheers. One of the biggest growths we have in the reptile industry today are the rare species of reptiles that aren't worked with. That's right. That's why I went ahead and partnered up again with Brian Susan over at Sundown Reptiles. Brian works with species such as kahua geckos, gargoyle geckos, all species of tree monitors. He works with Abronia and many other cool species geckos that you can check out all on his website. Head over to sundownreptiles.com, see what he has available. Brian's one of the best doing it in the reptile industry today. He's been on the show multiple times, so make sure you check out all of Brian Susan's episodes on Trap Talk Reptile Network. But more importantly, for the highest quality of captive bred reptiles, make sure you head over to sundownreptiles.com and make sure you give him a follow on Instagram. Thank you again, Brian Susan over at Sundown Reptiles. One of the things I love about being a part of the reptile industry is all the learning, okay? Learning can be fun, and I can prove that to you. Thank you so much to today's sponsor, Gary Scavino over at GS Reptiles. I highly recommend you head over to his YouTube channel, follow all this man's content when it comes to learning about rare species of snakes you could be keeping in the hobby, and also just finding out how easy a lot of these rare species of snakes are to keep in general. So thank you so much, Gary Scavino of GS Reptiles. Again, head over to his YouTube channel. Also head over to his Instagram to be on top of all of his current work and be ready for a big year over at GS Reptiles. Thank you so much, Gary, for your ongoing support. I really appreciate it. Cheers.